Hello everyone and welcome back. Today, we're diving into the 10th episode of our story where Iruka bravely steps in and takes Mizuki's shuriken to protect Naruto. Believing Iruka to be dead, Naruto is overwhelmed with grief and anger, ready to unleash the Kyuubi. But just as he's about to tear off the seal, he's stopped by none other than his hero, the Yondaime Hokage. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel after watching the video. Let's get started. Naruto couldn't stop the slight shudder that passed through him at the genin's declaration. The tainted chakra surging through the air, the weird black markings that half-covered the genin's face, the sudden locking on to Naruto's real position hidden in the trees, and the now slightly manic, power-drunk gleam in his enemy's eyes. This much chakra that was this potent could only really indicate a power boost not unlike the one that Jinchuriki got when they tapped into their Bijuu's chakra. This, though, was weaker. Though only he, Jiraiya, and the elder toads knew it, Naruto was better acquainted with the Kyuubi's chakra than ever before. Mayaboku made for one of the safest places in the world for him to try using it, with several powerful toads, and several seal masters directly on hand in case things went wrong, and Jiraiya wasn't one to pass up on opportunities like that. He wondered whether he should go to those lengths now. He had learned to manage small amounts of the Bijuu's chakra without its will affecting his thoughts, just enough for it to augment his speed and power to a significant degree, and more than enough to make matching his enemy here significantly easier. He felt the tiniest flare of approval from within himself that was his own, spurring him on, urging him to take a grasp of the chakra that he held and use it, and it was this feeling that made the decision for him. The Kyuubi was of course looking for any opportunity to force him into losing control, to escape. Practicing controlling its chakra was one thing, but to use it in actual battle, with so many emotions, so much adrenaline, so many things to weaken his control, he could not risk using it unless it was absolutely necessary. He may be a Jinchuriki, but he wouldn't cave and use another's power the second things got difficult. He'd win, and he'd do it without using borrowed strength. His attention snapped back to his enemy, even as he ignored a flash of frustrated anger deep at the back of his consciousness as the fox realized that Naruto would not be using his chakra. This is the first time I have used my master's gift in real battle before. Its power is incredible. Can you feel it? Can you feel how futile fighting has become? You cannot win. Relying on a power you've never used before to win you a battle is more than a bit of a gamble. Naruto stated calmly, determined to show he wasn't affected in the slightest by the chakra the Kusanine was bleeding. A gamble? This is the chakra of Orochimaru-sama himself, a gift he gives to those he considers truly valuable. The power of a Sannin added to your own. Someone like you fighting now that I have called upon it is ridiculous as you fighting Orochimaru-sama himself. Naruto made no bones about scoffing loudly at that claim. Bullshit. He said simply, taking no small amount of pleasure in the poorly masked indignation that his comment incited. You really have no idea who my sensei is, do you? Orochimaru really sent you into this thing blind. My sensei is Jiraiya of the Sannin, one of the only men in the world capable of standing opposite your master and taking his head. I know the power of a Sannin. I've felt his chakra, his killing intent firsthand. Hell, I've sparred him and been crushed in less than a second when he got serious. What's more, I know that for each of those things, he was holding back. I was seeing only a fraction of his power. Which is how I can tell you something straight out about your power, it doesn't come even slightly close. Gift or no gift, you don't even register on the concerns of your master or mine. The power has warped your judgment, and you overestimate yourself because of it. Didn't Orochimaru ever tell you that making that mistake is a very good way of getting yourself killed? The gray-haired shinobi's eyes were narrowed in concentrated anger, his gaze fixed firmly on where Naruto was hidden amongst the dense shrubbery, the tainted chakra focused firmly on the blonde in a fierce attempt to intimidate him. Overestimate myself? Perhaps. But it will be more than enough for you. For your insults I shall not be keeping you, you don't deserve the honor. You will just die, alone, and in agony, before being forgotten by the world. Your body, and that of your teammate will be left for the forest to consume. The slight shift and tightening of his grip on his katana was the only hint that the Kusanine was about to make his move, before he darted across the clearing towards the original Naruto, only just slow enough for Naruto to be able to see. One of his Kage Bunshin stepped in front of him, taking the ferocious downward slash aimed at him with its Sansatsuken, before shifting his body allowing Naruto to jab at the katana-wielding shinobi from behind him. The Kusa Genin pirouette to the left, dodging the blow, before crouching mid-spin, and using the momentum to sweep at the Bunshin's knees with his blade, dispelling it. Instantly, he rolled to the side to avoid a downward smash from the second Bunshin that had been hiding with Naruto. Landing crouched, he used his already bent legs as a spring to launch himself at the offending Bunshin, destroying it with a lightning-quick flurry of his blade. Naruto leapt at Orochimaru's former student with his Sansatsuken leading, creating yet another Kage Bunshin almost without thought as support, and both shinobi launched into a furious close-range struggle for dominance, with the Bunshin Naruto had hidden around the clearing rushing towards the melee in order to aid the beleaguered original. For the first time in his life outside of sparring with Jiraiya and Yugugo, Naruto was fighting absolutely all out. His enemy was faster, stronger, and was far more skilled with his weapon than Naruto had for his own. He could feel his muscles strain, forcing themselves beyond what Naruto had previously thought he was capable of in order to try and match his enemy's speed, and rather than act as a diversion and irritant, or strategic chess pieces, his Kage Bunshin were being forced into sacrificing themselves to the enemy's attack simply to make up for when Naruto himself fell behind the pace the Kusa Genin was setting. Every mistake and poorly judged maneuver was punished with drawn blood, his enemy ducking and weaving between Sansatsuken strikes and fists, and almost effortlessly targeting minor flaws in his taijutsu form. Being forced into a poor stance led to a sizable gash on his thigh from being unable to evade a sweeping attack completely, and a clever spinning strike had led to Naruto taking another nasty pommel blow to his face, that he could almost instantly feel swell and raise into a severe bruise. Worse still, the smoke in the area was growing ever thicker, as the flames from his earlier attack continued to spread through the forest towards them, their fight only just staying ahead of the encroaching wildfire. His vision was beginning to get severely impaired whilst his enemies remained unhindered, and breathing was becoming practically impossible. And the Kusa Genin knew it. Suddenly, without warning, their frantic melee was over, Naruto noticeably worse off for the exchange, and the gray-haired enemy had darted back into the smoke, becoming seemingly invisible in the suffocating haze. My master long studied the silent killing techniques of Kirigakure, and some of those secrets he passed on to his subordinates. All those from Otogakure are at least somewhat skilled at stealth and assassination techniques. I will concede that you are stronger than I without my master's gift, but now your time is up. You can't see, and have no means of locating me or predicting my attacks. When I have my choice of vital points to aim for, holes in your stance to exploit, how many attacks do you suppose your reflexes and luck will carry you through? 1. 2. This fight is over. Naruto scowled at his enemy's declaration. It was arrogant and infuriatingly presumptuous, but also contained a grain of truth. He couldn't see his enemy, and he knew enough about silent killing to know that those even moderately skilled at them could keep themselves utterly invisible in mist and smoke right up until they struck. Not only that, but the genin evidently knew some voice manipulation, as his voice seemed to come from all around the area, making it impossible to discern his location. He tried in vain to reach out to the natural chakra in the area and find his opponent, but was shaken from his concentration when one of his remaining Kage Bunshin was brutally beheading in the smoke, its memories shattering his concentration. A handful of Bunshin sprung into life around him, settling around him in a defensive formation, with several more patrolling around the area. He tried once again to sense his opponent, only for him to start destroying patrolling Bunshin, ever concealed by the smoke. It was, to an extent, a catch-22 situation. Without the Bunshin patrolling round him and his personal guard of Bunshin, he himself would be directly targeted, but for as long as he had Bunshin being destroyed, his skill with natural chakra was not at the level where he could keep his focus and receive the memories of a destroyed Bunshin. Naruto needed a way out of the smoke, and time to come up with a plan of attack, otherwise the Kusa Genin would wear him down until he was unable to defend himself, and then without a doubt, he'd die. A slight shift in the air in front of him, the faintest of noises masked mostly by the ever-nearer wall of flames. That was all the warning Naruto got, before he was bundled over by one of his Kage Bunshin as to just how poorly he had read his enemy's intentions. Killing a few Bunshin out in the smoke had been a feint, make him think he was being worn down, make him believe he had a degree of safety in the smoke, guarded by his Bunshin while the enemy was occupied with the rest. The blonde's shock at being attacked with next to no warning by an enemy that had managed to penetrate his defensive formation without any of the Bunshin realizing till the last second meant he didn't see his enemy pulling his sword back for the strike that would end his life until the very last second, when he felt the telltale pull of a Bunshin executing a Kawarimi with him to get him out of range of the enemy. He found himself looking down at his enemy from the tree tops, and before the blind shinobi could look up, Naruto made the chakra-enhanced leap to the next tree, and set off through them at a blistering pace. Make space. Remove his advantage. Tree branches whipped by him in a green and brown blur as he made through the trees as fast as his legs and chakra would carry him, confident that the Kusa Genin would be able to keep pace with him. True enough, he had a slight head start, and like all Konoha shinobi, had been trained to move through trees as though it were second nature. However, that curse mark had granted the enemy an incredible increase in speed and strength. It made slowing his opponent down a difficult prospect. No time to set traps or create an ambush, making Bunshin his only option, despite the fact that they would likely be destroyed easily. Suddenly Naruto grinned fiercely to himself as the solution came to him, and created a few handfuls of Bunshin, who broke off into several small groups and jumped off into the forest. Some would approach and distract the Kusa shinobi directly, peppering him with jutsu and ranged attacks. Their goal would be to distract him, keep him occupied with obvious, but lethal attacks in order to prevent him from thinking too hard about exactly where he was being led. The rest would branch off into the forest and begin to plant traps of varying intensity and complexity. He, after all, had the advantage. He was far better at travel through the treetops, as well as fighting in them, and after having his Bunshin scour and patrol the place since he entered here, he knew the forest better than perhaps anyone in the exam. He knew the best places to plant traps in the trees based on the likely movement of the enemy, and he had an incredibly good grounding in trap-making from his studies as that area had been particularly interesting to him. Most importantly in Naruto's opinion, however, was the fact that he was the undisputed prank king, perfectly capable of pranking a clan full of Byakugan users in their own damn home. It'd be a cold day in hell when he let this guy escape one of his pranks unscathed. Kosei scowled as the Konoha Genin escaped death once more and took to the trees, before dispatching the remaining Kage Bunshin with a swift strike. The blonde had been alive in opposition to him for far too long, longer than anyone save Orochimaru-sama now that he thought about it. It was infuriating to him, to be matched so evenly with a mere genin from Konoha. He who had been personally chosen and trained by a Sannin, matched at every step by a nobody. He had been forced to use his master's power, and still the boy had not died, still he had been matched. Of course, Kosei had the advantage from that point on, but they were shinobi, and the enemy taking to the trees changed the game entirely, opening up a realm of new possibilities for the Konohanin to exploit. The ugly frown marring his face deepened as he set off in pursuit of the Konoha Genin, his mind centered on the boy's infuriating attitude. He had taken his prey, had brushed off his master's gift and his own abilities as though they were irrelevant, his confidence in his victory never once wavering, never once becoming false bravado. He would destroy this enemy, of that he was certain. Crush him so certainly that he would be able to see the confidence fade from his eyes, leaving only mortal fear behind. First, however, he would deal with annoyances the blonde seemed to be able to summon like they were shuriken. He leapt to the right, avoiding a burst of spherical projectile consisting of air, a futon technique of some kind, and leapt from the side of the tree trunk he had landed on, propelling himself directly at the offending Bunshin, carving him neatly in two with a casual stroke of his sword, only to be forced to roll in mid-air to avoid a barrage of shuriken from another Bunshin, deflecting those that were on target with his sword. Hitting the ground, he immediately rolled forward and launched into a sprint in order to avoid a pair of kunai coated with an unusual amount of chakra, indicating a seal. The decision turned out to be a good one, as an explosion rocked the area behind, just too far away to cause him any harm. Sensing the Bunshin's approach, he brought his sword to bear with both hands, blocking a heavy staff strike from above, and retaliating with a series of fast-paced strikes, finally nicking the Bunshin with his sword, dispelling it. He reached out with his senses, aided by the power granted by the curse mark, and located the escaping blonde, who was doubling back on himself in a wide arc through the forest. It was clever, in fairness. Most people escaping in a panic fled straight forward even once out of sight, their minds not clear enough to think about how that was the most obvious thing to do. His opponent, however, was not most people. Had he been, he would have been dead a long time ago. All that it really accomplished in this instance, though, was ensure the blonde was closer than he had hoped, and so he immediately set off on a direct path through the trees, timing his approach so that he would intercept the blonde mid-flight. However, he had only traveled about halfway to his destination, when he made his mistake. So focused was he on his enemy, that he neglected his immediate surroundings, and failed to notice that the branch he had aimed his flight for was damaged, weakened at the joint, intentionally by a Bunshin, and snapped the moment his weight reached it. For just a moment, he floundered, the lack of footing catching him unawares, before he recovered mid-flight and managed to ready himself for a landing, only to notice the explosive tags peppering the floor below him, activated to set off a few seconds after the branch broke. Only a swift kawarimi with a nearby fallen branch, a reflex born of years of training under potentially lethal training, saved his life, but it was too slow to avoid the damage totally. The flesh and clothes on his left leg burned away, leaving him with his movements severely impaired, and the sudden realization that the tables of this battle had just turned back into the Konoha genin's favor. He more stumbled than dodged another flurry of kunai sent his way, and turned towards the aggressor, only to find his chakra senses going completely dead. He couldn't see, couldn't feel. Not a single hint of life besides himself existed besides the sounds of the forest, and a new, foreboding chakra that suffocated him, that seemed to permeate the entire forest. "You know," an unmistakable voice ground out directly by his ear, and Kosei immediately lashed out with his sword, only to strike thin air. "I warned you that overestimating yourself would be your downfall. You're not the only one with a gift." The words had a sarcastic lilt that the Kusa genin couldn't understand, not with the chakra he could feel clouding all of his senses. The blonde's, he belatedly realized. Power that he had apparently been holding back. He didn't get a chance to voice that opinion though, as a vicious haymaker sent him sprawling, breaking his jaw, and echoing round his head, a more powerful strike than he had ever taken in his life. He tried to sit up, his mind foggy, suddenly unsure of anything other than the pain and the need to get up, only for a heel to come down on his shoulder, knocking it out of its joint and eliciting a scream of pain from him that he hadn't realized he was letting out until he stopped, desperately gasping for breath. "For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry for what has to happen now, but you're a clear and present danger to my comrades, my friends. You have," the blonde broke off, for the first time sounding unsure, hesitant. "I can't let you live. I'm sorry." Kosei's mind drifted to his only true companions. Those he had collected by defeating his enemies. It was funny that here, as he was seemingly about to die, that instead of the friends that had stayed by him when no one else, not even his master, had, all he could see was the corpses that they were, decay slowed by his master's genius, trapped in the twisted puppet show that he played out in his free time. "I can't let you live, I'm sorry. I can't let you live, I'm sorry." Kin's information had reached him just in time to take full advantage. The idea that a person could be so naturally receptive to sensing natural chakra that he was able to see by reading the natural chakra of the air and objects around him was utterly incredible to him. Fortunately, he had discovered training on Mt. Mayaboku that the Kyubi's chakra naturally repulsed and clashed with natural chakra, one forcing the other back. All he had to do was disrupt the ambient natural chakra with the Kyubi's, and the enemy's sight was destroyed. However, Naruto was too preoccupied to be thankful for that. His hands shook almost imperceptibly, as he approached the downed Kusa Shinobi, kunai in hand. Images of a still sleeping man, a kunai buried deep in his sternum, flashing before him, haunting every step he made towards his next victim. For his village. For his friends. A glance to the right, and a picture of the man with his young daughter assaulted him, a detail his eyes had missed in the heat of the moment, but had haunted his dreams since. For his friends. He was hesitant, he was reluctant. The idea of finishing a defeated enemy this way truly sickened him. But he wouldn't take the chance. He wouldn't gamble that this shinobi wouldn't come back to harm anybody belonging to Konoha. He raised his arm, kunai sharp and ready to kill. Sternum and down. Fast, clean, and painless. Just as he'd done once already. Naruto-kun. It was all the distraction, all the opportunity required. The idea of killing a defeated man before one of his friends caught him momentarily flat-footed, and out of nowhere, the Kusa-genin, Kosei, had recovered his bearings slightly, and Naruto realized belatedly that he had stopped channeling the Kyuubi's chakra. Kosei's chakra flared maliciously, drawn straight from the mark, and his body lurched upwards in one last-ditch effort to escape. He hit Naruto in the chin with the pommel of his blade, and dashed past him, heading for the nearest human life, one of the Konoha genin that had previously escaped him, and lashed out with a wild strike, slashing her across her stomach. It wasn't a killing strike, not by a long shot, he was too shaken still, too dizzy and nauseous to be that precise, but it was hopefully a major enough wound to prevent a chase. Naruto watched, in dazed horror, blood gushing from his nose, as Hinata crumpled to the floor, and Kosei made his escape, and Shino leapt into the clearing, and instantly went to his teammate's side. It was not a killing blow, Naruto-san. The change in address from the Aburame was something Naruto was in no state of mind to notice as he stared unblinkingly at Hinata's fallen form, breathing but bleeding badly. The message within his words was unmistakable however. Finish this. Naruto's face twisted into a snarl as he brought a measure of the Kyuubi's chakra once more, and darted into the forest far faster than any genin should be capable of, quickly coming across the once again blind Kusa shinobi, and withdrawing his kunai once more. This time, there was no hesitation as he buried the weapon hilt deep in the back of his blinded and exhausted opponent's skull. The faces of those he killed in the line of duty would always haunt him. But from then on, any though of hesitation was tempered with the memory of Hinata's body, covered in her own blood. The price of his hesitation. The fact that she lived was, in his eyes, utterly irrelevant. Another day, another enemy perhaps, and she wouldn't have. It was a motley crew of genin that finally entered the tower in the center of the forest. An Inuzuka still bristling about being left alone in the forest, but glad all the same that Shino had chosen to chase after Hinata. Another of them, Hana, bustling between the genin who had fought tiredly, still treating some of the more minor wounds among their party. Hinata for her part, had hardly said a word since she had regained consciousness, her wounds healed almost entirely by Hana, and had opted to sit in quiet contemplation, her expression jumping between shame and desolation, neither of her teammates able to find the words to help her. Naruto, Kin, and Shino were the only genin who had remained alert and focused en route to their goal, ready for any further threats, though Kin had noticed that Naruto was quieter, his smiles less frequent since he had left her to fight Kosei. She had later learned that Orochimaru's discarded student had been the one to land that nasty-looking sword wound across the Hyuga girl's stomach, and he had done it by going past Naruto, no less. The Hyuga, Hinata, her name was, had been insistent that it had been her fault, that she distracted Naruto, that she made the poor decision to return to a fight she knew was above her level, that she should have been ready to defend herself, but Kin knew how hollow logic ran when you were wrestling with guilt. It didn't even matter that the Hyuga had taken no permanent damage. There would always be the what-ifs, the knowledge that an enemy had gotten past him and gained the opportunity to deliver a killing blow to his comrade. It didn't help of course, that there was the irrefutable fact that the blonde had Kosei at his mercy, and still allowed him past in a moment of distraction. It was rank inexperience, but he had learned his lesson in the best way possible, the way in which no one died. It's a clue. It was Naruto that spoke, and Kin's attention returned to the group now that they were inside the tower. They stood inside a circular room easily large enough to hold them all, decorated plainly besides a scroll hung on the farthest wall. The scroll was clearly a hint as to what to do with the scrolls. Opening them was most likely, in her opinion. And apparently, in the rest of the genin's opinion too, as both teams pulled out their scrolls, Team 8 having claimed theirs before they had been attacked, and opened them, revealing a series of Fuinjutsu seals that Kin couldn't even begin to unravel. She didn't have time to truly ponder them however, because the area around the seal exploded in smoke that indicated a seal releasing, and for just a moment she tensed expecting another attack. The stern face of Jiraiya of the Sannin staring right at her, as though sizing her up, judging her, was nearly as unwelcome. And, for a few tense moments, Kin genuinely thought she would suffocate under the gaze of one of the most powerful shinobi in the elemental nations. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the tension in the man's eyes all but disappeared and he cracked a large smile, and his attention turned to the room as a whole. Good to see all the little gakis made it. One of my old teammates' little experiments give you a spot of trouble? Naruto's face soured slightly, and he tossed the Sannin another scroll. He used some kind of weird seal to unleash a whole bunch of what I think was Orochimaru's chakra. Increased his speed and strength massively. The other one apparently could turn into a wolf/human hybrid. Jiraiya's eyebrows raised slightly in surprise as he caught the scroll, and he let out a low whistle. You know, this is the first curse seal that we've gotten intact that was suitable for studying. The Hokage will likely have a nice little reward for it, if not for the whole body. The man's face darkened slightly, before he continued. This is the first time that he sent people that were marked into the field anywhere close to any of the major nations. It's a big risk on his part either way. You'll be debriefed by Sarutobi-sensei, since you're the first of us to fight someone using it. All of a sudden Kin had a new worry. Jiraiya sounded like he knew. As far as she could tell, the only really useful piece of information she had was that Orochimaru planned to spring an invasion on Konoha during the final round of the exams. That's why he allowed some of those marked into Konoha, because this was his final play. The endgame. As far as he was concerned, Konoha would burn. If Konoha already knew, she had nothing useful to give them, so what would Konoha do with her, a shinobi who had worked for one of their most hated enemies? She of course knew locations of a fair few minor bases, some vague troop numbers, and intel on the abilities of some of Odo's major players drawn mainly from rumors, but how much was that worth, really? First however, Jiraiya started again, drawing Kin's attention back to him. I'm sorry to say most of you kids aren't done. Too many of you passed, so they're holding preliminary matches to decide who progresses into the finals. Naruto was caught flat-footed for a moment. All of that effort, all of that time in that hellish forest just to try and protect his comrades and friends from Gaara, and now one of them might well be forced to fight him anyway. At least, he supposed, if they were proper, officiated matches like the finals would be, there was a good chance Gaara would not be given the chance to kill by those observing. It was at least, a somewhat controlled environment, and the blonde couldn't imagine the Jonin sensei not being there. How are the matches decided? He asked, gaining curious glances from the genin present, who had all been caught up in equal parts shock and worry, exhausted and battle-weary as they already were. Randomly, I'm afraid, and I've been told to send you straight on, too. You guys were the last potentially eligible teams in the forest. Chance it was then. Who would fight Gaara would be left to chance. He looked round at Team 8, all exhausted, Hinata and Kiba still moving gingerly, and Shino more sluggish than Naruto had ever seen him, and prayed that it would be him. Naruto could only stand, horrified, white knuckles grasping the metal rails of the observation area surrounding the arena for the preliminaries. Later he would not be able to remember the Hokage's speech about how the exams were a substitute for war, about how their lives had been risked for what seemed like something as meager as prestige. Nor would he remember the first match of the preliminary round, a veritable dead rubber where a tired Hana had defeated Choji, who exhausted by the forest, had been unable to stave off attacks from the Inuzuka and her triplets. All he would take from the first two matches was Rock Lee's horrific scream as Gaara turned the bones in his right arm and leg to fine powder, and his sensei's hands on his shoulder, preventing him from getting involved no matter how hard he struggled against the man. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't think, only watch, as the medic Nin stretchered away his comrade. Naruto hadn't known Lee, but there was something inside the eyes of the bushy-eyebrowed genin that Naruto felt a kinship with. And, quite frankly, the boy's performance had been an awe-inspiring showcase of taijutsu, weaving in and out of Gaara's attacks as though they were coming in slow motion, and delivering blows that would have devastated any of the other combatants. And then Lee had unlocked 3 of the 8 inner gates, a kenjutsu that only jonin were said to be able to do, and the battle suddenly transcended into something else entirely. Something approaching jonin-level combat. But Gaara just kept coming. Naruto could feel him drawing on more and more of the Ichibi's chakra as time went on, his sand moving faster and faster to match Lee, and eventually, Gaara caught him. Even off balance, Lee was fast enough that Gaara could only entrap his right arm and leg, and dangerous enough that Gaara felt he needed to crush the limbs there and then, rather than opt for a clean kill. Small mercies, the blonde supposed. Though he was willing to bet Lee wouldn't see it like that. A shake of the head from Hana, who stood beside him watching the carnage that had followed her own match, and the ashen face of Lee's jonin sensei told Naruto all he needed to know, told him that his gut instinct was right. Lee would never fight again. Shino's match went by as a blur to Naruto, the blonde unable to really focus despite the fact that his opponent was one of Gaara's siblings. Fortunately, she was a touch less bloodthirsty than her brother, though proficiency in the shinobi art seemed to run in the family as she unleashed a torrent of futon jutsu at the exhausted Shino. She was highly skilled, and despite several attempts to turn the battle in his favor, including a particularly well-executed clone made from his Kikeichu insects, Shino eventually conceded defeat with mercifully few fresh injuries to show for it. The blonde glanced up to the electronic board that was displaying the random match-ups between the remaining genin and couldn't help but frown as the next one displayed. He glanced towards the first of the competitors, and the ugly anticipatory gleam in his eyes told him just what kind of match this was going to be. Despite all the faith he had in her, as he did in all his friends, he knew one thing with immeasurable certainty: Hyuga Hinata was no match for her cousin, Niji. Not yet, maybe not ever. Niji was a prodigy, a genius of a level that not even the most contemptuous of the main house Hyugas could deny. But there was even more than that. Niji had a chip on his shoulder, or so Jiraiya had explained to him, driven to greater heights as much by the main house's disdain and mistreatment of the branch house Hyuga, as he was by the hatred he felt for them in return, and the seemingly inescapable curse seal that bound both factors together. The fact that his father had been killed as a decoy for his twin brother, Hayashi Hyuga, probably hadn't helped. And, as much as Naruto could understand Niji's anger, how could he not, with his own burden such as it was? He knew Niji was using Hinata as an outlet for all that hate. It was in his eyes as plain as day, for all to see. All that bitterness, all that hate, and desire to strike back, to destroy the mark that bound the branch house, Hinata was the only available place Niji could direct his hatred, and now he was being given the opportunity to actually do it. This is gonna get ugly, he murmured, once Hinata had taken her position opposite Niji on the battlefield, trembling lightly, unable to remove her gaze from the boy's activated Byakugan, even as he assumed a tense combat stance and began to speak, insults designed to stab and tear at Hinata's fragile self-confidence and end the battle before it started. Niji wanted Hinata, and by association the main house, shamed by her loss. Jiraiya's scoff in response belied the readiness of the man to intervene, but Naruto knew the man well enough now to know he would be over the railings and between the two the moment Niji began to take things too far. Naruto wouldn't even see him move. Which left him with only one thing to do, really. He knew Hinata would never forfeit. For a girl so afraid, and so doubtful of her own ability, her desire to change, to be something more, held her in place. Too scared to fight properly, but utterly unable to run. Running, giving up would mean acknowledging that they were right all along, that she was a failure, a loser. Naruto's entire life up until now had been that exact struggle, scared of failure, but knowing that to give up, to back down was to lose something almost unnameable and impossible to regain. To lose without a fight here, to give up, would crush her, possibly irreparably, particularly after the forest, and Naruto would not allow that. She might well lose, and lose badly. But she had to fight. Had walk away with something to hold her head high about. She just needed the confidence to do it. He cupped his hand to his mouth and did something that the academy version of himself would be proud of. Kick his ass, Hinata. Beat the asshole right out of him. He screamed at the very top of his voice, drawing the ire of just about the entire arena, especially Neji, whose razor-edge Byakugan glare found him alarmingly quickly, but none of that mattered, as Hinata regarded him mouth ajar, eyes comically wide, and he gave her the biggest, foxiest grin he had in his arsenal in response and mouthed the magic words at her so only she and Neji could see. I believe in you. He could only smile as the resolve replaced fear, as her shoulders squared minutely, and she met Neji's baleful, intimidating glare Byakugan active for the first time in her entire life. Yeah, she might lose, but Neji did not deserve her fear, and if she couldn't believe in herself, then Naruto would do all the believing for her. The proctor's hand raised high into the air, and then slashed downward like a blade, and without even waiting for the man to cease his motion, Neji launched himself at his cousin in a violent maelstrom of chakra-powered gentle fist strikes all unflinchingly aimed at points that would cause at the very least semi-permanent damage to the girl. However, Hinata crouched low, and with a grace Naruto had never seen used in a fight before began to dance in and out of attacks, redirecting some away from her, and launching counter-attacks Neji who fiercely palmed them away to maintain his assault. Naruto couldn't help but wince. Each time Neji palmed away one of Hinata's attacks he was pushing massive amounts of chakra into her arm, and though thanks to the speed of her strikes he was unable to aim them perfectly at her tenketsu, the law of averages, as well as Neji's phenomenal skill meant that at least some of them had to be getting blocked. Not to mention those strikes apparently hurt like all hell. Finally, the crucial moment arrived when Hinata overextended herself by just a fraction whilst attacking, and Neji countered perfectly, delivering a perfect strike to the center of the girl's body. Hinata froze, in dead shock, noticing simultaneously Neji's hand resting on her stomach, and the lack of feeling in her arms. With a vague air of smug superiority, Neji pulled up Hinata's sleeve, revealing to the whole room the telltale round bruises that indicated a successful gentle fist strike that ran all the way up her arm. Is that all the air of the main house has to offer? The boy sneered lowly, and as though the words had struck her just as surely as Neji had, Hinata crumpled to her knees, leaning forward letting out several hacking, wet coughs. Naruto's grip on the railings tightened as he saw the fine spray of blood the floor before Hinata, and a thin trickle running down from the corner of her mouth. Internal bleeding meant internal damage, and that was almost always disastrous. Either way it meant that this fight was now over, and the blonde glanced over at the proctor, half expecting it to end then and there. I believe in you. The words circled round and round in Hinata's head, her mind seemingly unable to focus on anything else as the world spun around her, and the blood roared in her ears, whilst she fought to remain conscious. I believe in you. Her fist tightened around the fine sand that made up the floor of the arena, as she tried to find flaw in that statement. Tried to find the lie, the easy platitude just meant to make her feel better. Only she had looked into his eyes and seen nothing but the truth. He believed in her. In front of the entire room, in front of her cruel and hate-filled cousin, Uzumaki, Naruto had declared his faith in her as loud as his voice would allow him to. Her feelings for the blonde-haired Jinchuriki were both simple and complex to her. She admired him, oh, how she admired him. The boy who never stood down, never gave up. No matter how he was put down, or insulted, no matter that he got sent out from classes before crucial lessons, no matter how heavy the beatings he took from other pupils and even on occasion the teachers. He rose above it all, and defied his seeming lot in life. No one who had seen him in action since graduation could deny that, no one who had seen him in the forest would dare try. Uzumaki Naruto was everything she wanted to accomplish and more. No longer a failure. No longer weak. Did she have a crush on him? Maybe. But more important than anything else, she had the overwhelming desire to walk beside him. To have the strength to fight with him, to support him when he needed it, to be a true friend to him. She owed him that much, after all. Her entire life she had faced many of the same obstacles he had, only she had faced them with not nearly the same courage. He didn't know just how important he had been, just how many times watching him get back up to his feet after being knocked down had inspired her to do the same, to push past her own limitations. And now, just when she had needed him in the forest, when she had needed him against Niji, he had been the again to help her. She coughed again and her lungs burned furiously, bringing tears to her eyes. And here she was again, face down in the dirt, letting him down. Letting her teammates down. Her sensei. Her clan. I never give up, I never go back on my word, that's my ninja way. She smiled slightly at Niji's sound of surprise, despite the pain. She had said that out loud. Her legs trembled with the effort, and her arms barely supported her weight, but still Hinata pulled herself to her feet, and assumed a shaky stance. I won't run. The words were gasped and strained, but the conviction in them was clear to Niji, who barely suppressed a snarl as he reactivated his Byakugan. I can see with these eyes it's taking all your strength just to stand. You were burdened from birth with the destiny of the Hyuga clan's main branch. You've hated and punished yourself for your own weakness and frailty, but you can't fight your nature or change your fate. But you need not suffer anymore. Be at peace. And with that, Niji charged, chakra flaring. And with that, it was over. In a flash, Jonin surrounded the Hyuga, Kakashi himself grasping the hand that was aiming the killing blow at his comrade, Jiraiya of the Sannin standing loosely between the boy and his target, grim-faced. Typical of the main house to be granted special treatment. He hissed, subtly straining against his captors to no avail. That's enough of your clan politics bullshit, Hyuga, it has nothing to do with it. Naruto ground out, having leapt the rail and stormed over the moment Niji's intentions became clear. It has everything to do with it. Niji snarled, finally losing control of his tightly wound temper, at the sight of this fool who knew nothing about the clan, or its politics. Like hell it does. Naruto stated firmly, finally drawing close to Niji, staring him dead in the eye, and jabbing a finger at the metal plate of his Hitai-8. The day you became a shinobi of this village, you gave it and its people your loyalty above all other things. Hinata, above everything else, is your comrade and you have a duty to her just as she does to you. The Jonin stepping in to protect one of their comrades has nothing to do with your ridiculous politics. Naruto spat the word like it was something entirely vile, before narrowing his eyes and focusing his chakra and bringing it to bear on Niji as best as he could without too many other people noticing. I promise you this though, Hyuga Niji, you aim an attack intended to kill at a loyal shinobi of this village again, and I'll kill you while you stand. As it is, you had better hope we don't meet in the finals, because I promise you, I will give you everything you gave to her, tenfold. And with that, Naruto spun on his heel and began to walk away, ignoring whatever insults Niji was flinging at him as he did so. He only had eyes for Hinata, unconscious and being stretchered away, and he felt the anger build up once again. It seems so ridiculous, doesn't it? He didn't turn round to meet Jiraiya, Niji apparently dealt with sufficiently, only returned with the man to the balcony to wait for his own fight. They were family, he started, and he felt Jiraiya's hand on his shoulder once more, and noticed Hana glance at him with a look of concern that he was incredibly grateful for. True enough. And the love between family is some of the strongest in the world. The trouble is, that when those bonds are broken, the hatred that results is just as strong. When a family is as broken as the Hyuga are, the hatred runs deeper than anyone but they can know. Niji and Hinata are both victims of that hate, in different ways. If the two of you do fight, Naruto, remember that. Uncomfortable silence hung heavily in the air, a leaden sheet across each and every genin's shoulders. Only Gaara to Naruto's eyes seemed unaffected by the ending of the fight between Hyuga. Kiba and Sai were fighting below, but it seemed all too much like background noise to Naruto's own thoughts and feelings about what had happened previously. Sai and Kiba had no animosity, were both shinobi of Konoha, and whilst Naruto would normally be all too interested in seeing Kiba go up against Sai's unique brand of apparently ink-based ninjutsu, the safety of a bout between comrades gave him, and others it seemed, casting his eyes around at the others in the tower's arena, space to think. Family was complicated, Naruto knew. It was hard not to notice that, with how often spouses fell out, how often parents and children argued and such. Hell, Naruto had grown up in a village where a member of its most prominent families murdered everyone but his own brother for reasons beyond the comprehension of just about anyone. Still, he had never actually experienced it. Had never actually fallen out with a member of his own family, or had a chance to develop anything close to a deep-seated resentment. The closest to betrayed he had ever felt was knowing it had been his own father that had sealed the demon fox within him. But for all Naruto might have wanted to hate the man for all the anguish that had brought him, he understood the man's motives. Doing what he did to protect the village resonated with Naruto in an incredibly meaningful way. He only would have liked a say in the matter, even if his answer would have been less. How on earth did it get to the point where there was enough hatred between children of a family, cousins, that one would put aside loyalty to the village and their oaths as a shinobi of it to near enough try and kill the other? It was unfathomable to a boy whose most precious assets were the people who had allowed him into their lives and recognized him in even the smallest of ways. Niji's attitude was clearly one born of a difficult life, but the blame was surely in the wrong place. What the hell had happened that Niji was so desperate to strike out at any aspect of the main branch of his clan that he could reach, even if that meant killing close family who couldn't possibly have warranted that kind of treatment? Naruto was furious with Niji for his actions, but found it difficult to maintain that fury when it was so closely intertwined for the pity he realized he felt for the Hyuga. A glance up revealed Kiba laid out flat, pinned by a giant ink tiger, Akamaru being carried around the room by the scruff of his neck by a beautifully drawn eagle. From what Naruto had seen, it had begun a close fight, Kiba's relentless assault keeping Sai on the back foot. But he was tired from the forest, and barely recovered from his injuries. All Sai had to do was weather the storm and finish the job competently. The Inuzuka forfeited the match, but took the loss like a champ, extending a tired hand to his opponent. Sai took it, and for the first time Naruto felt there was a tinge of genuine emotion behind Sai's blank facade, indecipherable though it was. The two retreated to the stands, and the next pair were called, causing Naruto to blink in surprise. Ino vs Sakura. Now that was an interesting matchup, though not so much because of the ninjutsu that would be on display. The two girls had a rivalry that stretched back from almost before Naruto had known them, that was as fierce as just about any animosity between himself and Sasuke. On the surface it seemed to be an incredibly petty struggle over a childish crush, but he had spent too long trying to capture Sakura's attentions to not be aware that the water that ran under that particular bridge were far deeper than a fight over a boy, let alone one like Sasuke. Personally, part of him wanted to support Sakura like he would have done at the academy, but the thought made the rest of him uncomfortable. He had changed. His entire perspective on his own life, his dreams and his self-worth. He had always been aware that the beatings, beratings and bullshit that Sakura had sent his way were wrong, of course. But the part of him that on some level believed he had deserved it had been irrevocably changed by the events of his graduation. He had discovered who he was, what he was meant to do. People had seen him for who he was and accepted that, and now the unresolved issue of how Sakura had behaved towards him and his cheerful acceptance of it conflicted uncomfortably with the person he now was. Sakura spoke first, breaking the wall of tension that had built up between the two since their names had been called. "Right now, I have no intention of fighting over Sasuke-kun with you. You and Sasuke don't go together anyway, not to mention that with everything that's happened, I'm completely stronger than you right now." Naruto impulsively took a step back from the iron railings, anticipating Ino's explosion. It never came. Instead she just stood across from her rival, regarding her quietly. This seemed to rile Sakura up even more, of course, who tore her headband from where it had been pinning back her hair and held it out in front of her. Naruto couldn't help but notice the change in the two girls that he had known since before he had started in the academy. Sakura seemed more confident somehow, more sure of herself. It was as if she had found something that she had been looking for, much the same as he had the night he graduated. Ino's was the more pronounced change, however. Her explosive temper seemed under control, her entire demeanor shifted slightly to the more serious. It was a bit startling to Naruto if he was being honest, but there was one change that screamed at him from where he was standing, something that he was absolutely positive had never happened any time the girls had sparred or competed before. Ino, and only Ino, had settled straight into a well-practiced combat stance as soon as she had reached the arena floor, holding it throughout Sakura's admittedly toned-down histrionics. What's more, it was one he didn't recognize from his studies. "Jiraiya-sensei," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the battlefield. It pained him to leave out an allusion to the Sanin's perversion when he addressed him, but there were foreign ninja here. "What is that stance that Ino's in?" Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. "Looks like a variant on a traditional Yamanaka stance, though you'd have to ask a specialist, Might Guy for example, for more detail. They tend to favor more defensive, counter-attacking taijutsu on the whole. Yamanaka prefer to create space and time for them to use their mind ninjutsus over a straight-up power struggle. I've seen the girl's father fight from time to time. A tricky man, far more agile than his build suggests. Have you not seen her using it before?" "No, this is the first time, I'm certain. I would have noticed something like that even before I graduated." His sensei grinned wickedly. "Guess you're not the only one getting better then, Gaki?" Naruto scowled at the address, but inwardly basked in the half-compliment from his sensei. He was still unused to any real level of praise, and he knew the warmth that filled him from it was disproportionate to the actual comment. In all honesty, he found it hard to care. The two girls below finally looked set to begin, having utterly ignored the Jonin proctor's growing irritation at their lack of movement. Their haidiate were tied about their foreheads, and Sakura had started to race through the seals Naruto knew to be those for the bunshin taught in the academy. Pretty standard, but like all tools could be deadly if used correctly. Naruto smirked as Sakura suddenly increased her speed violently. The seals had been a feint, and Sakura had actually channeled her chakra to her feet, increasing her speed in a manner that took considerable control. She closed the distance to her rival in a moment, arm cocked back ready to strike at a stunned Ino caught flat-footed by her speed. Only she wasn't. Ino stepped forward crouched, right elbow thrust forward directly into Sakura's face. The crunch on impact made Naruto wince. In the quiet of the arena he couldn't help but think of what a body might sound like landing on concrete having been thrown from a great height. Sakura did much the same, collapsing bonelessly onto the stone floor. She groaned listlessly and tried to haul herself onto her feet, blood now flowing freely down her face and onto the floor. Her nose was broken and her face was split severely. For Ino's part, she looked like she might be sick. She hadn't been able to compensate for Sakura's increased speed to lessen the impact, and by their very nature elbow strikes had the potential to inflict considerable damage. Ino had never intended to hurt her former friend in the way she had. He knew he could be certain of that. But even Naruto could tell Ino had trained hard. She was faster and stronger, both mentally and physically. Sakura quite simply hadn't grown as much, and what both girls had assumed would be a closely fought bout had essentially been ended in the first move. "Sakura, Ino began what Naruto assumed to be a stammered apology as the proctor called the match. Sakura adjudged to be unable to continue, but was interrupted by a shakily raised palm from Sakura. Fair and square Ino pig." She slurred woozily, concussion making itself obvious. Sakura slumped back down to the floor, and the Mednines raced in to treat her. His former crush was stretchered away from the arena floor, and Jiraiya quietly let him know that medical ninjutsu was more than good enough to ensure that Sakura wasn't likely to experience any lasting effects other than a small scar. He appreciated the discretion alongside the subtle reminder of just how perceptive the perverted old toad really was. Naruto himself was finally drawn against a unruffled and spotless-looking Tenten. The girl, utterly professional-looking, stared for a moment, before dropping pretenses and smiling easily at him. Uzumaki Naruto, right? What do you say to me kicking your ass within the boundaries of a friendly match between comrades? A frown replaced the smile. A few too many of ours have been carried away on a stretcher after their matches got out of hand. Naruto smiled. Couldn't agree more, apart from the part where you win, naturally. Tenten was good, a weapon specialist who obviously worked harder than just about anyone their age at it. Naruto initially made the mistake of trying to spar her with his Sansetsuken without using any Kage Bunshin, just to see how good he really was. Turns out, it didn't matter how good he was, because Tenten was far better with a bow in hand, and now Naruto was carrying a wicked bruise on his shins after the brunette swept his legs from under him. Handily, Naruto's skill set had broadened considerably since the academy, as had his range of jutsus. It took some working, but he finally managed to snare his opponent with a lightning whip jutsu used by some clones he'd hidden underground. Despite her skill, it seemed Tenten hadn't really managed to prepare to counter many different strategies. When it came to something she found difficult to combat, her go-to response seemed to be, throw sharp things, fast. In fairness, it was a kind of simplicity Naruto could get behind, she just needed another string on her bow to be the complete package. That said, she took the loss far more amicably than he imagined either of her teammates, Neji and Lee, would, and it seemed he had earned the respect of another of his generation of shinobi. Shikamaru was drawn next, but to Naruto's initial outrage he withdrew from his match against the final Suna ninja, Kankuro. Only a touch on the shoulder from Jiraiya kept him from going across and demanding an explanation from his friend. The Sannin had his eyes narrowed at Shikamaru as he lazed back up to his spot above the arena, and for once Naruto decided to wait for an explanation. Something was going on, it seemed, and he hadn't quite deciphered what. That left Sasuke, who had originally been given a pass to the next round because of the uneven numbers, to fight Gaara's older sibling, and Naruto couldn't fight the frown that found its way onto his face as the raven-haired genin leapt to the arena floor with a grace that made him uncomfortably envious. He looked as casually assured as ever, hands in the pockets of muddy white shorts and body set in a casual-looking stance that somehow left very little in the way of openings. Despite everything seeming irritatingly easy for the Uchiha, a more perceptive Naruto noticed a tautness to him that was never there before, a stress tension that he was trying to hide. Jiraiya had indicated to him that Orochimaru himself had attacked Team 7 in the forest. They seemed to have been relatively unscathed by the encounter, but Naruto could well imagine that meeting an insane shinobi at the level of his own sensei would leave a lasting impact on you. Kankuro stepped forward with an irritating swagger that made Sasuke appear merely confident. He had never coped well with people who thought they were better than others, and suddenly Naruto found himself hoping, unbelievably, that Sasuke would win. This the bug I gotta crush? The makeup-clad Suna ninja queried, jerking a thumb at Sasuke and smirking insufferably up at his sensei. Baki the Suna Jonin they had rescued not all that long ago simply ignored the question. With the way the genin brushed off the tacit rejection, Naruto guessed that this happened a lot. Kankuro grimaced, and turned his attention back to Sasuke. The match started, and the two barreled towards each other, and Naruto could the telling red glint of the famed Sharingan in Sasuke's eyes. The pair snapped into a whip-sharp taijutsu exchange, Sasuke parrying every blow with superhuman precision even for a shinobi, managing to somehow make it seem as if he was barely exerting any effort. For a moment Kankuro was a little slow and Sasuke landed a vicious palm strike to the boy's chin followed by another with both hands to his chest. Kankuro staggered back but looked up, smirking viciously. Arms beginning to hurt, runt? Sure enough, Sasuke was rubbing his wrists gingerly. Perhaps if you stopped talking long enough to pay attention, you wouldn't have missed that noise. Sasuke drawled, matching the Suna genin smirk for smirk. Do you really think the Sharingan would miss your stupid trick? Kankuro looked taken aback, and Naruto strained to hear the noise that Sasuke was talking about. Faintly, ever so faintly, if he channeled chakra to his ears, fuck. Kankuro's curse broke all concentration, and the mass of bandages at the boy's back suddenly began to unravel of their own accord. A shadow staggered back from them just as Kankuro exploded in a shower of splinters. Naruto blinked and re-evaluated, but Jiraiya beat him to the punch. I suppose they don't call him a genius for nothing. Recognized the Suna brat was a puppet user but feigned ignorance to try and take out his main weapon. Smart. Those palm strikes were to plant explosive tags. Naruto barely had time to register Jiraiya's words before Sasuke threw himself at the shadow that had fallen out of the bundle of bandages. Kankuro's real body, Naruto realized, and launched into yet another vicious taijutsu exchange, far less even this time, that had a dazed Kankuro backpedaling furiously before the Yukika sent him flying with a savage roundhouse kick. Gaara's brother was winded but not finished. He crawled to his feet, and Naruto's view of the entire arena as a spectator gave him a crucial advantage over the Uchiha. He could see everything the Suna shinobi was up to. The chance to see a Kogetsukai in action was one a ninja rarely got without having the misfortune to be up against one in the field. Just seeing Kankuro subtly manipulate the chakra string still attached to his puppet after the explosion to aim its charred head at Sasuke's back was a revelation that in theory could keep him alive in the future. The disfigured head's mouth twitched and jerked open, revealing a metal tube within that as Kankuro stood, fired a slew of what was likely poison darts at the unaware Uchiha. Or, the pretending to be unaware Uchiha at any rate. Without looking, Sasuke rolled to the side, the shower of darts sailing harmlessly through the space he had occupied. Of course the Sharingan could see the chakra threads Kankuro was using to manipulate his puppets. The fight was a total mismatch, a fact that judging by the dismay on his face, Kankuro was beginning to realize for himself. The Uchiha withdrew a handful of shuriken, one between each finger, and let them fly. Each was charged with chakra, judging by the way they stuck deeply into the stone floors, and Naruto knew they had been aimed at the invisible threads of chakra that were at the core of Kankuro's fighting style. Sasuke's smirk was just beginning to reach unbearable levels when Kankuro conceded the fight, irritation plain. For all he didn't care for the Sunanin, Naruto empathized deeply. He might not have wanted Sasuke to lose, he was Konoha after all, but punched in the face? Several times? Absolutely. The late evening sky, burnt red and glorious above his village, painted Sarutobi's office in a dark orange glow as he slumped tenderly into his well-cushioned chair. Age had worn him down well, right down to his bones, but he felt as though the last few days had accelerated the process by a good decade. So many concerns all atop the other, layered and intertwined, and all a deep and serious threat to his people. Some shafts of light penetrated the darkness, however. His wayward student Orochimaru had been dealt a blow in the forest, and for the time being Uchiha Sasuke was safe from his machinations. Jiraiya had discovered a veritable treasure trove of information willingly given on their most pressing threat via Tsuchikin, who it seemed was a talented shinobi willing to press herself into the service of Konoha to escape her former master. It was an opportunity Konoha would never have had if it hadn't been for one Uzumaki Naruto, the greatest beam of light that illuminated the leaves Sarutobi's masters had tended to in their own tenure as Hokage. It was instinct alone that had tended his belief that one day Naruto would succeed him through the boy's early years. Nothing but feeling and hope, now he could see the evidence clear as day. In only a few months Uzumaki had grown into a fine shinobi. The Sandaime had lived long enough now that he had seen the patterns of time weave their way through the elemental nations more than a few times. Difficult times came and went, and people were guided through the most tumultuous by those that radiated light. The Shodai had been one of the brightest he had ever seen. Namikaze Minato, Naruto's father, could have surpassed even that, had he not been snuffed out like a candle before its time. Now forces conspired once again to cast a shadow across Konoha, and difficult times were once again coming. And though Sarutobi's own light was fading, new flames were being lit even now, sparking into light to guide the village through the coming darkness, Naruto's surely brighter than any. The Hokage's weathered and calloused fingers picked up his raven feather quill, and smoothly scratched out his signature on the single sheet of paper before him, the order that would reveal one of the greatest secrets his village kept to its populace. Naruto was ready, finally. It was time for the world to know just who Uzumaki Naruto really was, for the boy's own sake, and for the sake of the village itself. Naruto ducked a vicious right hook and struck back at empty space, only for bristly white hair to expand around his throat tightly and yank him harshly to the floor courtesy of a smirking Jiraiya. He gasped harshly for air, even as he summoned a trio of Kage Bunshin and set them after the Sannin. They were swatted aside like they meant less than nothing even as Naruto dragged himself to his feet. This was how much of his training with Jiraiya had been going. The bastard had been relentless since they had gotten out of the forest, sparring with him at several levels above where he was at. Naruto had grimly accepted the task, particularly as Jiraiya had provided him a courtesy he didn't tend to. He had sat down and explained why it was necessary the evening the training had started. The civilians didn't know it, nor did many of the shinobi underneath the level of Jonin, but Konoha was going to war. Well, going was perhaps a stretch, war was coming to it. It was something Jiraiya and himself had talked about previously, and he had picked up on the hints and clues from his sensei and the Sandaime. To have it confirmed though sent an uneasy twisting and pulling in his stomach that had absolutely nothing to do with out-of-date milk. This was the village he had sworn to protect, and now its enemies were moving against it. Naruto was action personified, and now he was being forced to wait sitting on his thumbs while their enemies maneuvered themselves into position to strike. Their only advantages lay in the fact their enemies did not know they were expected, and that they had made the mistake of choosing to fight on this village's home ground. He glanced to the side, where Yuzuki Yugugo, the special jounin that had worked with him before Jiraiya had taken him on, was putting Hana through her paces. She wasn't being taught by Jiraiya, but since they had worked together for the first time and had entered the Chunin exams together, they had sort of formed an unofficial team. Since Yugugo-sensei had been assigned to Naruto as a teacher and as protection, she had decided she could help with the training of the pair of them. The four of them had spent the previous 2 days training hard. Not only to be ready for the third round, but to be ready for the coming fight for their home. Far more than rank was on the line now. His role, it seemed, was to fight and subdue Gaara before he could unleash his tailed beast. They were being attacked by a combination of Suna and Oto, led by Orochimaru. Jiraiya was adamant that he and the Sandaime would have their hands full with the snake Sannin, leaving very few shinobi in the village that possessed the knowledge to seal Gaara and therefore fully neutralize the threat he posed. Even killing him could unleash Shikaku, and simply defeating him might do the same. It would be down to Naruto to seal him. Worry had been turning his stomach in knots ever since Jiraiya had told the whole truth of the invasion to him. The deaths of at least some of those he sought to protect was surely inevitable, and the thought made him want to empty his stomach. Jiraiya's fist suddenly collided with his jaw, making his head ring like a bell and sending him to the floor like an unwanted children's toy. You lost focus again, Gaki. You switch off once the fighting starts, worrying about who might and might not make it, and you'll be dead before you can blink. Jiraiya hauled him to his feet by the back of his shirt. You'll be no good to anyone once that happens, Naruto. Naruto scowled petulantly as his sensei dropped him back onto his feet, but mostly because he knew the old pervert was right. Death was inevitable in war, he just wished he could accept it like a shinobi was supposed to. Ironically, accepting he couldn't change it made it easier to prevent what deaths he could, but dragged him closer to being the kind of shinobi that stopped caring about the deaths and only cared about the victory. It was anathema to him, and he was terrified of it, of having to become that to save everyone. Somehow, it seemed many of the older shinobi, Kakashi, Iruka, Yugugo, and Jiraiya for example, managed to find a balance between the two states. But he knew from Jiraiya and Kakashi how much of a toll it had taken on them to do so, how much they had lost. There had to be a middle ground where he could protect everyone and not lose that crucial part of himself. Life had taught him otherwise, but he'd never been one to give up on the impossible. Ero Sennin, what will it be like? The battle, I mean. He frowned at the floor. I've been in a few battles now, but a war? An invasion? He trailed off, unsure how to really ask a man who had lived through wars that had swallowed the entire continent what he wanted to know. His sensei looked him hard in the eyes before seemingly deflating in front of him and dropping to the floor and crossing his legs. Naruto joined him wordlessly. It's nothing I can really prepare you for with words, kid. Battles outside a village are equally terrible in their own way, but shinobi fights inside a village have an entirely different feel. He paused, glancing back towards Konoha, its roofs barely visible above the forest canopy. Desperate and claustrophobic is the best way I can describe it. With a full invasion, there's no respite, every street corner and building has another battle, another thing that might kill you if you're not ready for it. Really, we're lucky to be the defending force, means we're the ones setting the traps. That said, you're going to see Leaf Shinobi die, Naruto. We're well prepared for what Orochimaru is going to throw at us in my opinion, but there's no escaping that fact. He knew it of course, but hearing it out loud still made his insides curl up in fear. It was everything he dreaded and more. He worked himself to the bone to, as far as possible, prevent just that. You need to be ready as you could ever be, to see that and be able to continue with your mission. Every shinobi does of course, but for you, the stakes are higher. Your burden can be a great help once you learn to control it, but before that it will be looking for your control to slip, looking for an opening, and someone that you know getting hurt could be just the thing that sets the Kyuubi loose. We're ready for Orochimaru and Suna, not a full-scale Bijou attack. We need you in control, so that you can stop Gaara from losing his. Jiraiya paused for a moment, looking thoughtful, before a sly smirk crept onto his face and he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Of course, if you suck even half as much as you do right now, Neji will knock the stuffing out of you well before you have to worry about Gaara. Maybe I should hedge my bets and teach him the seals in case we have to send him after Gaara. Naruto scowled and slapped the old man's hand away from him before throwing himself at the Sannin, a trio of clones exploding into life as he did so almost by instinct. Still, he appreciated the man's levity. A heavy pit had begun to settle in the very center of his stomach. Responsibility. Like Jiraiya said, Konoha couldn't handle a full-scale Bijou attack, and it was his responsibility to stop that. If he failed, how many would die before someone could stop Gaara? Would anyone even be able to with two armies led by Orochimaru to contend with as well? He had wanted to be Hokage since before he could remember, to protect the village and get respect. Now it was time to prove that it wasn't all just words, that every oath and promise he'd made weren't just wasted oxygen. He would protect the village, or he'd die trying. The son of the Yondaime, Ino murmured to herself for the third time since Asuma had left the clearing. But the village, she trailed off again, still unsure how to process what their sensei had just told them. Even a decade after his death, the Yondaime had become an almost mythical figure in the village. For Naruto to be his son was an earth-shaking revelation. Of course, it really shouldn't have been. Naruto was the spitting image of the man, and a newborn Naruto being handily available to seal the Kyuubi was far too much of a coincidence for nobody to have suspected it before it was announced. I wonder how people are taking it. Chuji asked from his position seated atop a tree stump in their clearing. I mean, the way people treated him was awful, now to find out he's the son of the fourth. That must be troublesome. Shikamaru mumbled from his position on the floor. The two other genin turned to face the Nara. That was the most that they'd gotten out of him on the matter, and he'd refused to shift from his spot, hands joined in front of him in the shape of a circle. What are you thinking, Shika? Ino asked, unable to keep herself from interrupting Shikamaru's thoughts any longer. I know you don't like to be interrupted when you're thinking, but this warrants a little more than troublesome. Shikamaru's eyes opened, face set in a scowl. You guys are focusing on the wrong thing. The timing for this is odd. If I were the Sandaime, saving the announcement until after the final round makes the most sense. It gives Naruto the chance to show everybody in the village what he's really about before the announcement, make them ready to accept it as the truth. Right now, everybody still thinks he's the village idiot. Some might accept it, but not enough. Some will actively target Naruto out of a perceived insult. It's human nature. Ino nodded slowly. Cognitive dissonance, the idea of holding two contradictory views at the same time, was a difficult thing to overcome for most people, including herself. People wouldn't be able to accept the new information ahead of the information they'd believed previously without some serious convincing. More likely, they'd reject the new information and lash out because some part of their subconscious recognized the new information as the truth. She glanced back at Shikamaru, his eyes clouded over, scowl unrelenting, and felt a tinge of unease grip her. "There's something else, isn't there, Shika?" He sighed, before fixing his two friends with an unreadable expression. "Have either of you noticed our parents are home an awful lot at the moment?" The non-sequitur caught Ino and Chuji off guard for a moment. "I guess Dad hasn't left on any missions for a little while," she said slowly, and the Akimichi nodded in agreement. "One of our fathers, elite jonin, not having any missions outside the village for a while is unusual enough." "All three? And the genin senseis too? You think something's happening?" Chuji's words were low, a statement, not a question. "I've had a bit of an ask around over the last couple of days. The special jonin are busier than they've been for a while. They're normally sent out on missions on a rotation, so there is always a good number of them in the village in case of attack. They're picking up the full jonin's mission load so as not to arouse suspicion with the other nations that something is happening. Which we'd normally only do if we were in the middle of a crisis to stop other nations from taking advantage," Ino continued thoughtfully. "Or," added Chuji, "if we were anticipating a crisis." "Exactly." Shikamaru agreed. "I've been thinking about the Chunin exams for a while. Suna sending a Jinchuriki to another village, they're planning to attack us at the finals." Ino's horrified whisper gave way to the sound of a light afternoon breeze rustling through the trees. Shino gazed into the treetops as he and Kiba sat and recuperated after their team's training session. It had been a hard session, but he had asked nothing less of their sensei. Round 2 of the exams had been a sobering reality check for them, and each knew without a doubt that had they been alone in that forest, they would be dead. They had only been a team for a short while, but the thought of either of his comrades being killed was enough to agitate his hive, and it took a considerable amount of concentration to soothe them again. Anger and fear after the fact did him no good, and generally, they would do no good at all. In the days since he had forced himself to emotionally detach from the events of the Chunin exams, a skill the Aburame prided themselves on, in order to see things as they were, divorced from his unavoidable internal biases and emotions. Simply put, Team 8 had fallen behind. The quality of Team 10 was clear, as was their increased level of training and change in attitude, to anybody who examined them carefully. Team 7, containing both Sasuke and Sakura, was always likely to excel given their members. Most startlingly, however, Uzumaki Naruto's improvement defied all logic and reason, and the change in his character was so stark that it stood to reason that Shino's prior assessment of him was utterly wrong. Kurenai-sensei's revelation as to Naruto's parentage presented a huge opportunity to assuage his own ego. Naturally, with the 4th Hokage being his father, of course Naruto would reveal himself to be exceptional. Of course Naruto would be beyond them all, it was to be expected. Except that Shino knew that to be nonsense. An exceptional father did not guarantee exceptional offspring, particularly when that father was not around to teach the offspring. No. Naruto had made himself exceptional, and in doing so had eclipsed Shino and his team. Even worse, he had been forced to risk his own life to cover for their deficiencies. As an Aburame, as a Konoha shinobi, but most importantly, as Naruto's friend, this was unacceptable. "Kiba. Would an extra hour of sparring be acceptable to you?" His canine teammate turned towards him, demeanor as taciturn as his own, and Shino knew Kiba's thoughts had been mirroring his own. "Let's do it, Shino." 1 month later, for the majority of the year, the village arena stood empty amidst the trees and buildings, a silent sentinel of Konoha. Today, as Naruto stood before its competitor's entrance, it was raucous with noise. Spectators from all across the elemental nations had traveled, some for weeks, to witness the spectacle of the Chunin exams. Naruto forced himself to suppress the bile that tried to rise from his stomach at the thought of it. The waiting, the training was done, and ready or not, he and Konoha would be going to war. The idea that he had to fight before an actual battle seemed entirely farcical. The fact that his first fight was to be against a Konoha ninja even more so, regardless of the score he had to settle with Neji. As it was, he could hardly bring himself to think of anything else besides the battle, yet he wanted to think of that least of all. Naruto-kun. A gentle voice broke him free of the train of thoughts he had gotten aboard before it really managed to pick up steam. He turned to face the interloper and found Hinata, dressed in civilian clothes, basic and black, fitting the mood, hovering awkwardly beside a tree, close enough that should she want to, she could flee behind it. "Hey Hinata." He greeted the girl as casually as he could, a relaxed smile slipped onto his face as easily as it ever had. "How are you feeling?" Directing the conversation back to the Hyuga made the girl reflexively reach for the tree and hide from the attention. Naruto felt a little guilty, but he didn't know if he could take questions aimed at him right now. He knew the rest of the genin hadn't been told, and couldn't risk alerting them that something was wrong too soon. "Oh no, I'm feeling much better, thank you. I'm told I was very lucky to be up and on my feet as quickly as I dash." Her sentence was interrupted by a wet, hacking cough, and Naruto couldn't help but notice that the handkerchief she used to cover her mouth was stained red from it. His eyes narrowed. "Hinata, I'm fine, Naruto-kun. There is still damage, but it's healing and I wanted to be here today." Naruto felt concern well up in him. She shouldn't be here today, she wouldn't be able to defend herself properly, but she had been cleared by doctors. Trying to turn her back would be incredibly suspicious to anybody listening. Hinata stood for a moment, oblivious to his turmoil, before speaking again almost as though she felt that she was interrupting the silence. "I just wanted to say good luck, Naruto-kun." The words came out faster than she had intended, but she took a breath and continued in a more measured, albeit quiet, voice. "I've always thought you were an amazing ninja. I'm happy you're getting to show everyone else now. You're going to be amazing today, I know it." The girl blushed violently, and before Naruto could reply she rushed past him towards the main entrance. He watched her walk, almost run, for a moment before taking a deep breath. He wished he could thank her before everything started. She had no idea how much had need something, anything to get him through that door. Once he did, there would be no turning back, no escaping what was coming. He thought of Hinata, and her bloody handkerchief, and her smile that was scared and courageous all at the same time. He thought of everyone that would be inside that stadium when the attack began, and for the first time since he knew Konoha was going to be attacked he didn't feel a near crippling fear. It was still there, a terror that even he didn't truly understand, but before it all he could feel an iron resolve take him. It was time to fight. It was time for him to go to war. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more content. Support the original author by clicking their profile link in the pinned comment of the first video of this series. They deserve the love. Want early access and exclusive content? Join my Patreon community, link below. Your support fuels these videos. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll catch you in the next video. Stay entertained, stay safe.